So far in Exodus, we have seen God build a small group of 70 people that came down to Egypt into a couple million people that come out of Egypt. Israel has spent 400 some years sojourning in a foreign land, being oppressed, afflicted. But then God came to their rescue, just as he promised to Abraham, and he redeemed his people out of slavery. But not only did he free them, he did it in spectacular fashion. God displayed his wonders in Egypt so that all the Egyptians now know what Yahweh is like. Do you remember that question that Pharaoh asked? Who is Yahweh that I should obey him? Now he knows, and all the Egyptians know, and even the children of Israel know. And not only do they know about God, we have found out now that they truly believe in Yahweh and in his servant Moses. Moses then, as they have crossed the sea and see the Egyptians lying dead on the seashore, leads the people in worship to the God who reigns, to the God who is incomparable, to the God with whom you cannot compare him to anyone else. There is none like him in all the land. Our hopes are high at this point, right? I mean, maybe as high as they have been in the entire story so far. God is fulfilling his promises to Abraham. Abraham's offspring have increased to a staggering number. God is fighting for them, and they're now on the move back to the land of Canaan, to the promised land, to the land flowing with milk and honey. And God is with them, and rest is in front of them, if they'll keep trusting the Lord. And our hopes are high. Now we look at Exodus chapter 15. It's interesting that right after the people sing, we find out that on the other side of the sea, having just experienced God's deliverance, they're out in the wilderness and they don't have any water. They come to a place in chapter 15, verse 23, to a place called Marah, where they could not drink the water because it was bitter. And so the people start to grumble. You see, the people who have just been rescued, that have just seen God provide for them and fight for them, very quickly are grumbling against the Lord, against Moses. What are we going to drink? Moses cries out to the Lord. The Lord tells him, throw this log into the water and it'll become sweet. And Moses does it and the people can drink. But then look at what God says in Exodus 15, verse 25 and following. So in the middle of 15, it says, there at that place, the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, notice this, 15:26, if you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and if you'll do what's right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. Now that's interesting, right? If you'll do this, then I won't judge you like I did the Egyptians. I won't put the plagues and the diseases on you like I did to the Egyptians. This is a little perplexing for us because hasn't God promised to give them the land, to bless the people? And we'd have to say, well, yes, he has. He has promised to Abraham that the land will belong to his offspring, that God will bless them, that God will bless the world through them. But I think we're also seeing in this that if this particular generation of Israelites, which has just been rescued out of the land of Egypt, if this generation is going to inherit the land and get the blessings, they must believe and obey. They must trust and obey the Lord. It's not guaranteed that this generation will be the one to experience all the blessings. They have to listen to the Lord. Now we come to chapter 16. Now they haven't had water. God provides water. But if you remember, back to chapter 12, the author kind of hinted they had to leave so fast they didn't have time to prepare what? To prepare food. They didn't bring provisions for themselves. And now there's a couple million people out in the wilderness. Where are they going to get food? And this becomes the issue right away in chapter 16. Look at 16:2. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you've brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Now maybe I missed those verses somewhere in the Old Testament when they were sitting by the meat pots, right? And eating bread to the full. I don't think that was actually happening. Maybe they have a little bit of fuzzy memories. But they're saying, why did you ever bring us out here? I wish God would have just killed us back there in Egypt rather than bring us out here to die, to starve. And then the Lord says to Moses in verse 4, behold, I'm about to rain bread from heaven for you. Where can the people get food out here? And God says, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you. And then God gives very specific instructions. He tells them, I'm going to test you in the way that I do this. I'm going to bring down bread from heaven, and you need to go out and you need to pick up just what you need for the day. Don't take too much, just what you need for the day. And for 6 days, you need to do that. But on the seventh day, on the Sabbath day, I don't want you to take anything. There won't be anything actually on the Sabbath day. So the day before, you need to take twice as much. This is what God says. What's he doing? See, God wants to feed the people with their daily bread. He wants them every day to have to trust him to provide for the next day. So what happens with the people? The people go out the first day and they see stuff. They don't even know what it is. It's like bread from heaven. And so they start asking a question. They ask, what is it? And do you know what they call it then? They call it manna. This bread that came down from heaven for them. They call it manna. But do you know what the word manna means? It means, what is it? So they go out, they call it, what is it? And that becomes its name. And every day they start to eat, what is it? But if you read the story carefully in chapter 16, do you know what happens? Some of the people go out and they see it out there. They know this is their food. And so what do? They take more than they need for the day. They eat some of it and they try to store some of it for another day. And do you know what happens? It grows worms and they can't eat it. Do you know what happens on the sixth day? Some of them don't take enough for the seventh day. And so they go out on the Sabbath day to look for it. And do you know what happens or what they find? They find nothing. There is no what is it out there on the seventh day. Some of them hadn't listened. It doesn't matter whether God is saying only take it for 1 day or on this day take it for 2 days. There's always people, lots of people in the land who aren't listening to the word of the Lord. And God is testing these people to see what's in their hearts. Now you come to the end of chapter 16. And I want to look down at verse 35. One of the most interesting verses in this whole section. It says, the people of Israel ate the manna 40 years until they came to a habitable land. They ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now, if I could show you on a map how far it is from Egypt to the land of Canaan, you'd say that shouldn't take 40 years to get there. But yet, they eat the manna for 40 years. The author kind of gives something away here to us if we're paying attention. They're going to be eating the what is it for 40 years until they get to the border of the land of Canaan. It shouldn't even take 40 days to make that journey from Egypt to the land of Canaan, even with such a big group. Why would it take 40 years? This is interesting. Now, we go through the next couple of chapters, and I'll just skip over to chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19. The people of Israel have been grumbling and complaining, but God has continued to provide for them. God is providing for them every day bread from heaven. He's providing water for them when they need it. He's helping them along the way. He's helping Moses be a good leader. And God then leads the people to the mountain of God, to Mount Sinai, to Horeb. Do you remember that? Do you remember when Moses first encountered God? Way back in Exodus 3, he saw the bush and he's like, I'm going to go and look at this bush because it's on fire, but it's not being burnt. And God interacts with him there. And one of the things that God says to Moses is, Moses, this is going to be a sign for you that you can trust me. I'm going to bring you back here to this mountain with the people, and you're going to worship me here. And by Exodus chapter 19, God has led the people back to Mount Horeb, back to Mount Sinai. God has done what he promised, confirming to Moses exactly what he said back in Exodus chapter 3. And now in Exodus chapter 19, Israel, this huge nation, is camped in the wilderness before the mountain. Verse 3, Exodus 19, verse 3. Moses is going up to God, and the Lord calls to him out of the mountain, saying, this is what I want you to tell to the people of Israel. And I want you to read it. Look at Exodus 19, verse 4. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Isn't that an amazing picture? Says Moses, tell the people this. God says to you, you saw what I did to the Egyptians, how I brought judgment on them, and you saw how I swooped down and lifted you up and brought you to myself like on eagle's wings. Verse 5. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. See, God is the owner of every nation on earth, but he's saying to this people, this ransomed, saved, redeemed people, if you will listen to me, you'll be my treasured possession among all the peoples on the face of the earth. And not just that, verse 6, and you will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Moses, go tell the people this. If you'll just listen to my words, if you'll obey me, you'll be a kingdom of priests. What would that mean? What would that look like? What would a priest do? We're not really familiar so much with priests yet, but it seems like they would go between people and God. That's what a priest does, right? The priest represents people, sinners, before the Lord and goes between God and the people. And do you notice what God is saying to the nation of Israel? If you will obey my voice, if you will keep the covenant, then you will be a kingdom of priests. Israel will go between God and whom? All the nations on earth. And Israel will be the in-between, the mediator between the holy God and the peoples of earth. And Israel will be able to bring God's light to the nations. And Israel will be able to bring the nations to God, because this is God's will for the children of Abraham, right? In you, Abram, all the families on earth will be blessed. And now God has made Abram's family into a huge and mighty nation. And if they will listen and be his holy people, they will show the nations the goodness and the beauty of God. And the nations will be able to come to Israel and hear the words of God and get to know the God who made them, the God to whom they belong, for all the earth is the Lord's. And look at Exodus 19, verse 7. So Moses calls the people, sets before them these words, calls the leaders, and verse 8, and all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Do you think they will? This is kind of like Genesis chapter 2. Do you remember that? When God told Adam, you must obey, or there'll be a threat. You'll face terrible consequences of death for disobedience. You need to obey what I say. And we read it and we thought, will Adam obey? And now what we've seen through Exodus 16 to 19 is that this whole nation must obey. If they don't, God might put on them what he put on the Egyptians. But if they will obey, there will be blessing for them, and not just blessing for them, but blessing through them to the whole earth. And we ask, will they obey? What do you think? We've already seen lots of grumbling, lots of failing of test. How optimistic are you that this nation, this generation at least, will be able to bring blessing to the nations?